So many things going on today. Um, I don't see your mic, Bridget. Go ahead and try to talk. I don't think it picked you
Can
up.
you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay.
Okay, awesome.
All right. So I just saw the news about Greg Biffle and his family. Please keep them in your prayers. Holy crap, that's awful. Um, ugh, too much going on. Okay. We're on chapter 13. This one is about Jefferson's savings, the CIA, and a senator. So, the author starts off talking about the so called deregulation of the savings and loan industry was even before it was even a gleam in Ronald Reagan's eyes. There was another savings and loan in Texas besides Surety that was giving regulators problems in the 70s. This institution was Jefferson Savings and Loan in McAllen, Texas, down by the Rio Grande. Jefferson Savings and Loan was chartered in 1956 with 6 directors, including U.S. Senator Lloyd Benson Jr., his brothers Donald and father Lloyd Benson Sr. Another director was Vannie Cook, who would one day be a business partner of reputed mob associate and surety S&L looter Raymond Navalny. Lloyd Jr. stepped down as a director the next year, but continued as a large stockholder with 15% of the shares. Donald also had 15, while Lloyd Sr. had 18%. By 1974, 2 new names appeared on the board. Guillermo Hernandez Cardia and his father. We've talked about Guillermo before. His father's name was Marcelo Hernandez. Hernandez Cardia is a Cuban exile who was in the CIA backed Bay of Pigs invasion. He was captured and then ransomed back to the US government. He went to work for Citizens and Southern Bank in Atlanta, and then in the 1970s formed World Finance Corporation in Miami, which we've talked about in other forums. Very heavy into CIA stuff. By 1977, Hernandez Cardia and World Finance were the focus of intense and extensive state and federal investigations into drug smuggling, money laundering, gun running, political corruption, and funding terrorist activities. You know, like any CIA exile organization. But the case fizzled out in 1978 and only resulted in one income tax indictment of him in 81. And we know why, because he was protected. The author goes on to say that the CIA was partly, if not totally, responsible for making sure the investigation was not prosecuted. At least 12 World Finance employees had past association with the CIA because it's a CIA proprietary bank. Hello. When Assistant U.S. Attorney R. Jerome Sanford, who resigned in frustration and disgust over the investigation, tried to obtain from the FBI its CIA files on world finance, he was denied access based on national security. But the CIA did acknowledge that it had 24 documents relating to world finance that were generated in 1976 and 77. One of the 6 founding directors and stockholder of World Finance, along with Hernandez Cartier, was Washington lawyer Walter Sterling. Walter Sterling Surrey, Surrey, described by a journalist, John Cummings, as a charter member of the Good Old Boy Network in U.S. intelligence. Surrey had served in the OSS during World War II. After the war, he went to work at the State Department as director of the Division of Economic Security Controls. They help orchestrate economic warfare. He resigned his position with World Finance in 1976 and has denied any knowledge of being involved in intelligence. In 1985, Surrey's Washington law firm, which concentrated on international law and represented foreign countries and multinational corporations, merged with the nation's largest savings and loan firm, Jones, Day, Revis, and Pogue. This was the same law firm that hired Rosemary Stewart, the former head of the Office of Enforcement for Federal Home Loan Bank Board, and the same firm that represented Vernon Savings and Lincoln Savings. In other words, they were a CIA cover-up team. It was also the same firm being sued by the feds over alleged misconduct in Credit Bank Savings in Austin, the successor to Jefferson Savings. After Hernandez Cartier was convicted of bank fraud in 1982, he sold Jefferson Savings to a group of Austin investors. They later changed the name to Franklin Savings, which was merged by Scott Mann with Equitable Savings to form Credit Blanc Savings. In the spring of 1992, Jones, Day, Revis, and Pogue anteed up to the losers table when it settled with the bondholders of Charles Keating, ACC, but Jones Day was not the first nor the last to make amends for its wayward ways. 90 of the 95 original co-defendants settled with plaintiffs. In addition to CIA connections, World Finance, there was also evidence of Mafia ties, because they're inseparable. The DEA and congressional investigators found links to Santo Trafficani, the Mafia boss in Tampa, Florida, including a World Finance employee who was Trafficani's associate. An Interpol report identified Juan Romanic, a World Finance director, as a Trafficani associate. An affiliated company, Dominion Mortgage Corporation, which shared the same Coral Gables address and borrowed $2 million from World Finance to buy an office building there, worked with Trafficani's family to supply drugs to Las Vegas. Dominion Mortgage was also trying to buy the Caesars Palace Casino in Las Vegas. In 1976, Hernandez Cartier bought Jefferson Savings from Lloyd Benson Sr. This is a quote. "I remember old man Benson called me out of the blue one day and decided to sell the savings and loan." Sure he did. At that time, the chief examiner of the Texas Savings and Loan Department said that. He also went on to say, "I said I understand and hope they would sell it to someone who would take good care of it, like they did." The next thing I know, they sold it to the Mafia or CIA, depending on which one you want, which hat he's wearing. "When I was a reporter for the Houston Post," the author wrote, "and first discovered Hernandez Cartier's purchase of Jefferson Savings from the Bensons, the author called Senator Benson's office to ask about his involvement. His press secretary, Jack DeVory, returned a call, and the author told him what his questions were. DeVory replied that the senator was in a conference on an island off the coast of Spain, but he would try to get some answers." That's interesting, off the coast of Spain. DeVore called back shortly after, apparently having spoken to Benson and also Benson's attorney. DeVore stated categorically that the senator had never owned any interest in Jefferson Savings and Loan. He then said that he had satisfied himself that Senator Benson doesn't know Cartier and has never had any dealings with him. The author then asked Valori if Benson ever owned any stock in Jefferson. He replied he didn't recall owning any. Then the author told Valori that I had documents that were filled in with Texas Savings and Loan Department that were signed by the Bensons and notarized that showed him as an original director and stockholder. Valori said he'd get back to me. Less than 30 minutes later, Benson called the author from the island off the coast of Spain. Yes, he had been one of the original organizers of Jefferson. And then went on. I sold my interest in Jefferson and bought Brazos Sports Savings and Loan. He insisted that he sold his stock long before the sale to Hernandez Cartier. I had no part of that deal, the senator said. Ask about Hernandez Cartier, he said, I don't know who the man is. And in reply to a question about whether he knew about the CIA's intervention in the criminal prosecution of him for fraud at Jefferson, he says no. And I sure would if that actually happened, except for it did happen. The federal prosecutor who worked on the Jefferson Savings prosecution of Hernandez Cartier told the author the following story with the stipulation that his name not be used. Quote, I got a call from the FBI agent in Laredo who said that the special agent in charge in San Antonio needed to talk to him. We met in McAllen at a hotel at 9 p.m. There was a person from the CIA with him. That's weird. He, the CIA officer, told me that Cartier had done a bunch of things that the government was indebted to him for. You know, like Cuban exile, terrorist stuff. And he asked me to drop the charges against him. I said, I'm not giving you any promises and that I would think about it. The prosecutor then told me the CIA guy said in the room there that Cartier had scammed Saudi Arabia out of $30 million and the CIA had approved it. This is probably in reference to an incident in 1978 when Ajman, one of the UAEs, in one of the UAE areas, according, excuse me, to author Penny, I don't know how you pronounce her last name, Lorno. Some Arabs in that area had invested $37 million in one of Hernandez Cartier's loan schemes. And then when they discovered the money was gone, confiscated his passport and threatened to cut his hand off. John Cummings, in his account for inquiry, simply states that the authorities discovered vast shortages of cash in the bank. A confidential report prepared in 1987 by a former law enforcement official in Europe for a prospective business partner of Aiden Khashoggi demonstrated that Khashoggi's long-term relationship with Hernandez Cartier, that he had one with Cartier. According to the report in early 1978, in this same area, Hernandez Cartier got into difficulties when authorities discovered that he had systematically milked their joint venture at the Ajman Arab Bank. He managed to evade arrest by using a false passport previously supplied to him by an associate. Both men were subsequently arrested in Miami on charges relating only to the false passport. Hernandez Cartier and his associate were found innocent of passport charges by a Miami jury. But they actually used one. The confidential report goes on Quote, it should be noted that Ajman Arab Bank was subsequently saved from collapse when it was bought by none other than BCCI, which, of course, is a CIA front bank used for money laundering of all of the illicit activities. The federal prosecutor informed me that he told his boss in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Houston of the request by the CIA officer. My boss said to do whatever you think is best, so I decided to go ahead and prosecute him. Hernandez Cardia was convicted in 1982 of defrauding Jefferson Savings. His sentence was combined with his 81 tax income fraud sentence of 5 years. He was indicted again in 82 for defrauding Jefferson Savings, along with his father, his friend, and business partner, Camilo Pardrea. This time, prosecutors did drop the charges the next year, saying the investigation was quote unquote flawed. The judge in the case also allegedly urged the prosecutors to drop the indictment. Pedreda, a Cuban exile, another one, living in Miami, is a prominent and influential Republican fundraiser and developer in Dade County. In 1990, he pled guilty to falsifying U.S. HUD documents and getting a HUD guarantee of $17.8 million to build an apartment complex. And in 1986, he was in a business deal with another prominent Dade County Republican, John Ellis, Jeb Bush. What? Yeah. On October 3rd, 1988, in Newsday, a reporter, Newt Royce and Gaylord Shaw, reported that Pedreda was once a counterintelligence officer for the former Cuban dictator Batista. Well, that explains a lot. When Castro came to power, Pedreda fled to Miami and became a candy salesman. Newsday reported that in 86, Jeb Bush's real estate company, Bush Realty, became the exclusive leasing agent for a 9-story Miami office building constructed by Pedreda, in partnership with the aid of a $1.4 million HUD grant. Jeb told Newsday that he did not believe he had called federal officials to help Pedreda get housing funds. I'm a very honest person. I hate to categorically say something I do not recall. I do not believe I called anybody. But that's not what the records reflect. Newsday also reported in February of 1988, Pedreda went to Washington as one of 127 distinguished presidential appointees, and you're not going to believe this. Well, you will. To the White House Conference for a Drug-Free America. Nothing like a good old slap in the face. Newsday said that Pedreda's office is adorned with autographed pictures of Ronald Reagan and George Bush. Pedreda told Newsday reporters that he met George and Jeb in 1980, when George was seeking the presidential nomination. Regarding his relationship with Jeb Bush, he said, believe me, you're not going to find anything wrong. Before Hernandez Cartera was indicted in 81, he pretty much had the run of Jefferson Savings. After he bought control of the savings and loan, the first thing he did was make a $7 million loan on an office building he had in Florida. Then, because that's not what they're for, you're not supposed to do that with savings and loan. The savings and loan board said he went down there. One of the guys on the board said he went down there and told him, you can't do that. Get that loan out of there. The board member said he found out that big bags of cash was going out of Jefferson Savings to a bank in St. Louis. Law enforcement sources said Hernandez Cartera was using the savings loan to launder drug money. It was also said that he was looking for any way he could to stop the Cuban exile, the bank director or board director, and get him out of Jefferson Savings and Loan. I knew that he was a tennis player, so I challenged him to a tennis match. I told him that if he won, we'd stop investigating. But if I won, he would leave. He laughed and said, Art, you don't think you could win, do you? The bank investigator said he interpreted that to mean that Hernandez Cardia would do anything it took to win, including physical action. The examiner said he wasn't afraid of him, but some of the other bank examiners were. One day, the bank examiner was having a drink at a bar in McAllen when with an FBI agent who was working undercover trying to expose the fraudulent home loan application scam at Jefferson. They said that they were commiserating about how Hernandez Cartier seemed to be untouchable. I said, what is it with him? He's bad, yet he gets away with it. The FBI looked at him and said, did you ever think about the CIA? All of this occurred before deregulation and beginning of the savings and loan debacle in the mid and late 80s. The two most egregious cases of savings and loan fraud before deregulation, Surety Savings and Jefferson Savings, were crawling with mobsters and CIA operatives. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that the same mobsters and same CIA operatives were at the head of the pack after deregulation. Mario Renda, we talked about him a few chapters ago. He's the guy up in New York. Expensive taste. Basically, he's the guy that lived in that big mansion. He became chairman of an international construction company called International Planners and Development, or IPAD. Suddenly, he was involved in deals all over the world: Haiti, Saudi Arabia, Ivory Coast, Jamaica, and was making deals with Aden Khashoggi. No investigator, prosecutor, or reporter has come up with how Renda was able to make such a transition and enter the world of international finance and business. Perhaps it was good through his father-in-law, who was involved in a bank called the Bank of Sicily, but it's impossible that his overseas activities escaped the attention and interest of the CIA, particularly because of the countries he was dealing with. Now, of course, the CIA is not going to miss anything with Saudi Arabia. They were in bed with Saudi Arabia. They're not going to miss anything in Haiti because they were in bed with all of the dictators they installed and overthrew any legitimate government in Haiti. They definitely aren't going to overlook anything in Jamaica because they overthrew that government as well and was using it as a drug trafficking transit point. So there's no way that Renda escaped the notice of the CIA. In 1976, Renda brokered the construction of the National Guard headquarters in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to a Long Island construction company. Renda related to Bruce Mafia, the Brooklyn organized crime prosecutor, that he was told by a member of the Saudi Arabian royal family that the construction bid would be awarded in exchange for a 10% kickback. Now, what's interesting about this, understand how these National Guard entities set up in all of these countries was done so under the tutelage of the CIA. Also, in 1976, Renda arranged for financing for construction of a hotel in the Ivory Coast, a country on the west coast of Africa and a neighbor to Liberia. Liberia, where the CIA, that's the former colony of the United States that after the Civil War, we basically stole from the country, the continent of Africa, to resettle slaves that wanted to go back to Africa, and we've been involved in their politics ever since. Renda told Mafia that a government official demanded and received a concealed interest in the project in exchange for government support. In 77, Renda entered into a joint venture with Khashoggi on a $5 million deal to build precast concrete homes in Saudi Arabia. That agreement allegedly fell through later, apparently, as did several others that proposed construction of a cement plant in Haiti. Renda was negotiating the cement plant in 1978 and agreed to pay Haitian official a concealed interest in the plant in exchange for government support. Kickbacks. Renda said the plant was never built because he couldn't arrange the financing. And what's interesting, as we found out when we were researching Haiti, it's hard to believe, other than American construction, that a concrete company in Haiti would ever work. Because when I was doing my bachelor's degree in construction management, they used Haiti as an example. They literally dig a hole in their front yard and mix up, using the raw components, their own concrete and build it room by room, which is why when they have earthquakes, it's so devastating, because the concrete is of such poor quality that even the slightest jarring of it completely decimates the entire building. They have no rebar in it, and it's literally homemade, and they've been doing that forever. The regular people are not interested in a concrete plant. That would only have been for the government. By this time, Renda had quit his job at iPad and was the treasurer of the Arab International Bank in Saudi Arabia. Of Saudi Arabia, sorry. It was an offshore bank where he cut his teeth on banking and CDs. Also around this time, he was negotiating to purchase and operate a casino in Jamaica. Renda agreed to cut in a Jamaican official for a piece of the action in order to get his license. The official reneged, and Renda never got his casino. Renda was at Arab International for about a year when he left and formed his own company, Arabus, which was set up under a vague rubric of international trade and finance. In 1980, after Congress lifted the ceiling on interest rates on CDs, on savings deposits, Renda changed the name to First United Fund. He was off and running on brokered deposits. As previously noted, Aiden Khashoggi, a Renda associate, made more than $12 million in profit out of land deal with Mainland Savings, where Renda was brokering deposits. Brokering deposits is money laundering. This occurred just days before Khashoggi began wiring money to Iranian middleman Ghorbanifar to start the U.S. Iran arms for hostage. They were using a savings and loan, brokered deposits, to pay for the missiles going to Iran. I want to make that emphatically clear. Khashoggi's relationship with Renda is discussed in an affidavit by Lawrence Iorizzo, filed in federal court in Kansas. Iorizzo, a mob associate, was in the gasoline business in New York and was charged with bootlegging gasoline, pocketing the taxes, along with Michael Franzese, a captain in the Colombo Mafia family. Iorizzi fled to Panama, later returned to testify against Franzese, and was then placed in federal witness protection program. Wonder how many mafia people and CIA assets are in that program. In his affidavit, Iorizzo tells about being introduced to Renda in 81 by a mutual friend, V. Leslie Winkler. Winkler was an international con man. He was in the business of veal feeding with Rizzo and was participating in linked financing scams with Renda. Winkler Rizzo stated in his affidavit, told me that Renda was very close to Aiden Khashoggi and that Renda might be able to assist me in obtaining a Kuwaiti oil contract. Renda explained that Khashoggi owned property in the town where I lived and wanted to build a helicopter pad on his estate, but had encountered resistance from the local authorities. Renda told me that I could ingratiate myself with Khashoggi if I could get him the permits. In a press conference in Houston in the summer of 90, after Khashoggi had been acquitted along with Imelda Marcos for helping her late husband hide Philippine assets, i.e., gold, Khashoggi denied even knowing Renda. Another person with connections to, and by the way, that gold they were hiding was tied to the CIA too. Another person with connections to the intelligence community also appeared in Rizzo's affidavit. Rizzo discusses how he and Renda planned a linked financing scam with a New York bank using Rizzo's company called Houston Holdings. Quote, I explained to Renda that Houston Holdings was a Panamanian shell company. Inasmuch as I had literally purchased the company's papers from a lawyer in Panama who maintained them, along with other entities, on the shelf of a bookcase in his office in Panama, meaning there was no such company. It was just a fake. This lawyer's last name was Samos, Samos. And he was introduced to him by V. Leslie Winkler. Or possibly from another guy, Eric DeAnton. Renton and V. Leslie Winkler and I discussed that Houston Holdings was a company which had been originally created and used as an offshore cash laundromat by its previous owner. I explained that Houston Holdings had been used in prior years by its previous owner to hold several $million of Panamanian banks and financial institutions. I had purchased the financial statements of this company from Samos for prior years, along with the stock of the company for about $10,000. Samos is Stephen Sander Samos, a Hungarian refugee who at one time was the director of the Free Trade Zone Corporation in Miami. Another one of them. Samos moved to Panama, married Alma Robles Chiari, a relative of Panama's last freely elected president, and began selling off all of the shell companies to anyone that needed one. In the late 1970s, Samos helped Tony Fernandez, a narcotics trafficker and CIA contract agent, because they just go together, and Ray Corona, a money launderer, buy Sunshine State Bank in Miami. How do you buy a state bank when you're a drug trafficker and a money laundering guy unless you own somebody at the state level? They were caught in the mid-1980s, and Samos turned state evidence against Corona while receiving immunity from prosecution for admitting to money laundering drug money. Corona got a $3 million loan in 1984 from People's Savings and Loan in Texas, which he used to shore up the capital of Sunshine State Bank in order to keep the federal regulators from closing his bank. There will be more about this later on. Samos also appeared in the Iran-Contra scandal in connection with an off-the-shelf Panamanian company called Amalgamated Commercial Enterprises, or ACE. That company was set up in 1984 and then sold the next year to Southern Air Transport, which is the CIA. and was involved in shipping the weapons to Iran and the Contras. Ace appeared on the diagram of the Contra aid operation found in Oliver North's safe. It was used by Southern Air Transport and North's Enterprise to funnel money to the Contras. According to the Wall Street Journal, Ace was used to buy 2 planes for the Contras and provided maintenance and fuel for the aircraft. In a November 16, 1985 entry in North's White House diaries, he wrote, "Tell Alan Byers, who was the head of the CIA Central American Task Force, who we found in Costa Rica and El Salvador. He's the guy that was arranging all of the stuff to supply the Contras, that Ace is okay," meaning approved for use. All of Ace's employees apparently worked for a Panamanian company, International Management and Trust Corporation, which had been owned by Samos. The Wall Street Journal reported, "It is not known whether Samos retained control of the company after he sold it in 83, or what his role may have been in setting Ace up." Miami attorney John Matz, who defended a man charged with violating the country's Neutrality Act by helping the Contras, was later hired by Ray Corona after Corona went to jail related to Oliver North. A Southern Air vice president then flew to Panama to meet Samos and set up Ace. Ace bank accounts for the Contra operation was at Banco de Iberia America, a Panamanian bank principally owned by an Arab banking corporation, which received money from North's accounts in Switzerland. This bank also was used by Samos in transactions with Sunshine State Bank. However, in all of Renda's ramblings and business dealings, he hooked up with an attorney from Omaha, Nebraska named Jack Chapman. Chapman had worked for the CIA during the 60s as a contract agent, apparently in the Caribbean and Haiti. Chapman indeed told federal investigators that he worked for the CIA. One official of the CIA confirmed to the FBI that Chapman had been some sort of contract employee, but the FBI felt that he had gone off the reservation. Yeah, sure. Chapman said he first met Renda when at one time I was in New York and he was introduced to me. We filed 3 lawsuits on behalf of his attorneys in California and New York. They were breaches of contract with various people. At the time, we were trying to help him do some activities. We weren't earning any money out of it. We were just there to help. According to officials familiar with the case, another service Chapman performed for Renda was to take $500,000 in cash to Renda's partner, Joseph DiCarlo Sr., who later turned state evidence against Renda. DiCarlo then took the cash to another Renda partner, Martin Schwimmer, who used it to bribe Teamster Union officials. These officials, in exchange, handed over their pension funds for Renda to use and broker loans with. Officials familiar with the case, who spoke on the condition of anonymity, said this cash started out in one of Renda's off-the-books bank accounts where he and Schwimmer put their money skimmed from the union pensions fund deposits. The money was then wire transferred to a bank in New York and next wired to a man by the name of Clemard Joseph Charles. Charles is a Haitian exile who had been in contact with the CIA as early as 1960. Charles laundered the money for Renda. He turned it into cash so it couldn't be traced back to Renda. Charles washed the money by first wiring it to bank accounts in Switzerland. After that, investigators lost track of it. But when it came back to the United States to Chapman, it was in cash. Most books on Haiti describe Clemard Joseph Charles as Francis Papa Doc Duvier's personal banker. Duvalier is the CIA propped up stooge in Haiti. They describe him, in addition to being his personal banker, as his business partner and financial advisor, as well as a bagman who delivered payoffs. It seems that Charles first gained Papa Doc's favor in 1964 when he was able to smuggle 2 aircraft into Haiti from the United States, which had embargoed aircraft sales. Weird. How do you smuggle airplanes out of the United States? Duvier rewarded Charles with a private bank, Banque Commerciale, along with the monopoly on compulsory car and old age insurance, and the control of Port-au-Prince main wharf. He's the guy in charge of everything coming and going, to include human trafficking. Charles was also placed on the board of directors of 14 major companies and became the exclusive agent to General Electric, Simmons, and Toyota. He received numerous commendations from Papa Doc. Suddenly, in 1967, Duvier had Charles thrown in jail. Charles spent 10 years until he was released by Papa Doc's son. Then he was exiled. All the books say that Papa Doc threw his banker and bagman in jail because Charles had gotten too big for his britches. Maybe so, but there was something else involved that the books don't mention: the CIA. Charles was recruited by the CIA in 1963, the same year the agency was sponsoring and paying exile and rebel groups to try to overthrow Papa Doc. We know Charles was recruited by the CIA then because of the findings of the late 1970s House Select Committee on Assassinations. The committee was investigating the assassination of JFK and tracking a man named Charles de Morgenschild. Weird how that name shows up so many times in Gladio, isn't it? De Morgenschild had moved to Texas, worked in the oil business, and befriended Lee Harvey Oswald. In fact, there's some evidence that de Morgenschild was used by the CIA to keep an eye on Oswald. That's true. De Morgenschild had met Charles in Haiti, where he had business interest, including a share in the government hemp operation. De Morgenschild was also keeping an eye on Clint Murchison's meat packing business and cattle ranches there. At one time, he had worked for 3 States Oil and Gas, one of Murchison's oil companies. De Morgenschild was also on close friendly terms with Houston oilman John Mecum Sr., according to a Houston private eye familiar with de Morgenschild. And the Count de Morgenschild and George Bush apparently knew each other, which would be convenient. Bush's name and his Midland, Texas address were in de Morgenschild's address book. One CIA contract agent, Herbert Atkins, had reported that de Morgenschild's real job in Haiti in 1963 was to supervise a CIA-sponsored plan to overthrow Duvier. In May of 1963, de Morgenschild arranged a meeting between Clemard Charles and Dorothy Matlack, who was the Assistant Director of Army Office of Intelligence and U.S. Army liaison with the CIA. According to de Morgenschild's CIA files, which the Assassination Committee obtained, the purpose of the meeting with Matlack was to arrange a rendezvous between Charles and the CIA rep. De Morgenschild attended the meeting with the CIA to Matlack's surprise. She did not know what role de Morgenschild was serving, but felt that he dominated Charles in some way, like he's his handler. Finally, the kicker in the CIA memo. Because of the potential political information Charles could give about the current situation in Haiti, the CIA became the primary contact with Charles. That put Charles' ability to obtain two aircraft from the US, despite the embargo, and would be a factor in his subsequent 1967 jailing by Duvier in a whole new light. For it was in 67 that Mitch Warbell, along with some Haitians and Cuban exiles, were caught planning an invasion of Haiti from Florida. Remember Mitch Warbell, the terrorist training camp outside of Atlanta and Fort Benning guy that produced silencers for automatic weapons? That guy. Warbell had been a veteran of OSS office in China during World War II and served there alongside E. Howard Hunt, Paul Helliwell, and John Singlip. He told author Jonathan Kitney that he did not work for the CIA, but with the CIA. He said the distinction was that he got paid by a private group, not directly from the CIA. Just wanted their proprietary. The charges against Warbell for planning the invasion of Haiti were later dropped, because of course they were. He then said that was the reason, because he worked for the CIA. They can't prosecute me. After Charles got out of jail in Haiti in the late 70s, he hooked up with Warbell on another Haiti operation. This indicates that Warbell and Charles and the CIA had been working together to get rid of Duvier in 67. Papa Doc found out about it and clapped Charles in jail. After Charles got out of jail, he apparently put his expertise there and with the CIA to good use. A federal agent with the Organized Crime Strike Force said that in addition to his dealings with Renda, Charles was involved in laundering money for the mob in Nevada and was doing business in Florida with a member of the Bonanno Mafia family, who got the first casino license in Haiti from Papa Doc. The Bonanno associates may have helped Charles get the aircraft from the US. Also in Florida, Charles shows up as a director of a company called St. Charles Pacific Peace Organization, which means you know it has zero to do with peace. It was a nonprofit company which filed to do business in 1988. One of the officers in that organization was Watergate burglar Frank Sturgis, who has a long-standing tie to both the Mafia and the CIA. Sturgis, who was originally Frank Florini from Philadelphia, helped the mob run their casinos in Cuba before Castro kicked them all out. Then he turned around and helped the CIA with all of their plotting against Castro. After Charles left Haiti, he went to Miami, because of course he did. He became the president of a company called CIC Enterprises, which filed to do business in 77. The registered agent and secretary for the company was a Miami attorney, Albert Krieger. Krieger will show up later in the book as a close friend and attorney of Miami lawyer Lawrence Freeman, who pleaded guilty to laundering drug money. Freeman had previously worked for the CIA, Paul Helliwell, and served as in-house counsel for Paul Helliwell and CIA front bank, Castle Bank and Trust in the Bahamas. It was used by the CIA and Mafia to launder money. Freeman also was involved in the $200 million land deal that we'll get into later in Florida with the DuPont family. As for Charles' longtime and constant desire to be president of Haiti, it came to naught. After Baby Doc abdicated in 86, the country finally got to hold actual elections in early 1988. Charles was one of the candidates for president, but 3 days before the election, the Haiti Supreme Court tossed his name off the ballot along with 4 other candidates. The first place Mario Renda got caught with his brokered deposits linked financing scam was to a tiny bank in a strip shopping mall in Kansas City, Kansas. It was crawling with Mafia and CIA agents and an Iranian, which we'll get into next tomorrow. That's the end of today. Oh my gosh. It's so crazy that this book takes us through so many of the things that we have uncovered and interweaves the savings and loan debacle with all of that. Because most of this we've covered over the last 3 years, it's just shown in a completely different light that had not been revealed to us yet. It's crazy. Stellar, go ahead.
Oh my gosh, the last couple weeks that you've been having these spaces and talking about some of these families and stuff, me growing up in Las Vegas, you know, you're talking about Bonanos, the other people you're talking about, you talked about Molaskis, these different people that you've talked about in the past, and then even like today. I grew up with these people. I grew up with people whose parents owned these casinos that were laundering. We all knew that they were mob but had no idea CIA, and I'm freaking the heck out. I'm sorry. I just want to say, oh shit. Sorry.
Thank you. And Stellar, that's kind of the experience that I have, you know, when I'm reading, and you and I've talked about it before. When I found out that Evergreen was a CIA proprietary, you're like, what the hell? It's crazy. SR, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank everyone for attending on Spaces and Rumble today. I think we've covered the gamut concerning all of organized crime, yet the one that got me was Guillermo Hernandez Cartaya.
Yep.
He was born in 1932. Okay, he was a Cuban-American banker. So now we already know what happened with Cuba, so now we know exactly what's going on here. But what really gets me, not only was he in cahoots with the CIA, this guy had banks he was in cahoots with the KGB as well. So this was back in the 70s when he was doing this. And of course, the Soviet Union didn't break up till 91, but we were already there. It's like, wow.
Yep. Illini, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel. A couple of interesting connections. First off, this Renda character, while you were reading, I kind of ran it down in the book, and then I kind of ran down some links that I kind of remember from the whole Claudine Gay scandal. Just for some background and everything, I think you mentioned, and I think it's about page 184 of the book, Renda in 1978 is trying to set up this, concrete plant in Haiti. And he owns, I think he's going to wind up giving, a partial stake to the Haitian authorities in it. It's kind of interesting that the Gay family is linked to GDG Construction, or GDG Concrete, which owns the largest concrete plant in Haiti. It's got, and they do have, a Haitian official who owns 5% of it along with them. And it's got some of the same structure that Renda was trying to set up in the late 70s. And I think it's a valid link, just because, of the whole structure.
Right.
It's kind of funny, Claudine Gay gets appointed by Penny Pritzker, the daughter of Jay Pritzker, who was involved with the whole Castle Bank scandal and the Burton Cantor, Mafia links and everything.
Right.
And then finally, you've got, I think kind of the tell is actually Ambassador Michael McFaul's tweet, which nominated her when she was in the running. He basically said that this lady is one of the smartest women I've ever worked at with Stanford. She, at Stanford, she does great work. I was a colleague of hers. She was just a few offices down from me. And then it turns out that all of her work is plagiarized. And Michael McFaul, of course, is the head of the U.S. Embassy to Russia, where 75% of the State Department employees there are actually CIA agents.
Yeah.
And he's always out there talking about how terrible Trump is, and was involved in the whole Hamilton 68 scandal. He was on the board of directors there. So it kind of ties in today that you've got this Renda character running around, in Haiti in the late 70s with all these CIA links trying to buy up the concrete industry. And I wonder, whether the Gay family,
whether they just replaced him,
whether they might have been, the CIA's ultimate end goal for whatever they were trying to do down there.
Yeah, they just picked a different guy.
I have one other comment, one other link analysis point for you, just briefly. The Murchison family, you mentioned Clint Murchison briefly in this. The Murchisons were kind of the head of the Texas political machine back in the 60s and 70s.
Yep.
They were good friends with the Hoovers. There's a note in Haldeman's journals from 1969 or 70 where Nixon, the White House, Hoover all had this dinner. They dined on Murchison steaks. And Hoover, LBJ, the Murchisons were good friends. And if you watch The Men Who Killed Kennedy, I can't endorse all of the sourcing on this because LBJ was allegedly seen by the press that evening somewhere else in another hotel. But there were allegations that the Murchisons held a party the night before Kennedy was shot. And part of the celebration was, what was going to happen the next day, according to two people there.
Yes. And Clint Murchison's name is all over that. Thank you for adding that color. Zen, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel. I got in here very late, and I just heard you mention a mall in Kansas City. What was the name of that mall again?
I don't know. Let me look. We're going to transition to it. The whole next chapter is about it.
Okay.
So we'll cover that tomorrow at 4. Because they don't give the name. But Kansas City, Kansas is all through this book. Because they had a lot of links to all of these people and a couple of savings and loans there. Let me just look ahead. And see if I can pull out that name real quick. Let's see. No, it involved the Indian Springs State Bank there. I don't see where they said the name of the mall, though.
Okay, I got one more question.
Sure.
I have Audible through Amazon, and are there any books out there you'd recommend for that are on Audible if you're into that?
That deals with Operation Gladio?
Yeah.
Have you read Paul Williams' book?
No.
That's definitely number 1, and it is on audio. Danielle Ganser's, I don't know whether his is on audio, but it's called NATO's Secret Army. Those are like the 2 basic you have to read to kind of get the ground floor foundational premise of what's going on and how big it is. Those are the 2 best sources of information.
Okay. There's one I've got queued up. It's called The Devil's Chessboard.
We're going to do that next.
Oh, cool.
So that is definitely a great book. And that is our next book.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So you're thinking right along the right lines.
Yeah, I read the book Behind Enemy Lines.
That is also a very good book.
Yeah. That was when they were basically just fighting World War II and before they got all corrupt and everything.
Yeah, I'm not sure they weren't corrupt in World War II, but it is a good book.
Yeah, I thought it was great.
Yeah, there was a lot of shenanigans in World War II. I've read so many World War II books, both in the Pacific theater and in the European theater. And it's interesting that none of them, even though the OSS was intimately involved in a former form of Gladio during that time, you never hear or read about it in any of the mainstream books that are promoted on those two theaters of war during World War II. I have learned so much over the last 3 years that I really wish I'd have known I was on active duty. It got me in trouble. As a matter of fact, one of the brigadier generals that I do another show with said, because he knew a lot of this stuff when he went to Air War College, that he was arguing with the professors the entire time, and they finally put him off in some corner in some special working group to get him away from everybody. And that would have been me. So it probably wouldn't have been healthy for my career, but I would have loved it. Bridget, go ahead.
You referenced one of my favorite pet projects, the Morgan Shield.
Yes.
Just to give a little meat on the bones, in 1942, the U.S. State Department placed a lookout or refusal on his passport, labeling him an alleged Nazi agent, requiring a referral to the fraud section from any applications. There was an FBI memorandum in September 1942 describing him as very pro-Nazi, and that was while he was residing in Washington, D.C., and shared his home with British intelligence and U.S. naval officers.
You mean when they were trying to take over the whole stay behind during World War II?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
And let's see.
So since you're talking, go ahead.
On an OSS, it was not like they say it's, oh, well, none of it was founded. Yeah, it was all founded, and they knew it. And they knew very well about his Nazi
ties.
I believe that's the guy who, after he passed away, they even found a Nazi card in his belongings.
And for those of you who have joined us more recently and weren't here for the oil pipeline book, George de Morgenshield first met Allen Dulles well before World War II, when he was 10 years old, when Allen Dulles went to Azerbaijan, Baku, to buy, on behalf of Standard Oil, to buy an oil field from the Nobel family, the fake Nobel Peace Prize guys. That family owned an oil field in Azerbaijan. George de Morgenshield's father was the station manager that worked the sell of Nobel's oil fields to Standard Oil in Baku, Azerbaijan, with their representative, Allen Dulles. And that is where Allen Dulles first met George when he was like 10 or 11 years old. He has literally known George most of George's life, and then goes on to use him as the handler for Oswald, and uses him as the star witness at the Warren Commission. So,
don't forget.
Go ahead.
One more thing. The James Angleton's desk, they're now saying, according to Morley, who runs JFK Facts, had Oswald's file on it a week before the shooting. Yes. He had it checked out, and they can prove it due to the entries in his file that, whatever reason, it was on his desk before the shooting occurred. You can imagine a scenario where de Morgenshield is communicating information back to the agency, and it's eventually going up the ranks.
Yes.
And giving to James Angleton.
Yes.
That's another link in the chain now.
Yes. Yeah.
That man has got, he just really just evil, sick son of a bitch. And he comes up throughout so many of our, and he was a close confidant of Reinhard Gerlin.
Yes.
So
the actual Nazi.
So many,
The actual Nazi.
Right. So many connective tissue, and we just keep stumbling across him over and over and over again. Rinse, wash, repeat.
Yep. SR, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel. To answer Zen's question, what was going on there and the bank that was involved was the Indian Springs Mall, also known as the Spring Shopping Center. And the bank was called Indian Springs State Bank.
Yep.
So if people want to do some research ahead of time, that's fine.
Or you can wait till tomorrow.
How many other people are involved in this at this point in time? Because thank you, Colonel, for starting us at the beginning, and I'm seeing everybody show up time and time and time again.
Yes.
It just blows my mind, some of the stuff that we're finding out here, even with Walter Sterling Surrey. He was born in 1915 and died in 1989. But if you look at everything he was involved in and what he did during World War II, part of the OSS,
yep.
In Sweden, you name it, this man was practically in every nation on the planet. So,
yeah, we could spend 6 months on this book if we spent time on dissecting every chapter. But knowing that these people repeatedly come up over and over again, I debated at the beginning of it, but I think the overall context of demonstrating that the entire savings and loan debacle was Mafia and CIA inspired is kind of the bigger mission. But there are lots of threads to pull out of this book, that's for sure. Lots and lots of them. Okay. I don't see any other hands. So we're going to call it a day. I did want to go over just real briefly. Tomorrow we did get the schedule set up for, let's see, we're doing War Hamster at noon. I will be on a radio show before that, but I do not have the call sign of the radio show. I'm going to be on that show for about an hour at 10:30, and then War Hamster at noon to continue our series on secret societies, and our regular space at 4 p.m. So that's what it looks like so far. So anyway, Stellar, go ahead.
One last thing, because now it seems like there is a lot of focus on the laundering and stuff and the Las Vegas ties and all this other stuff. Remember how I was telling you and Bridget and SR about keeping an eye on like the stocks and stuff like that with the corporations, because that's their laundering pool.
Yeah.
So remember how I was telling you that most of the Las Vegas Strip, the land is all owned by this company called Vici.
Yeah.
And the buildings and like these big corporations, and they just accumulated a few more things. All of the places were all mob owned places, FYI, Caesar's Palace, and ties even with Jimmy Kimmel and all that other stuff too, with Caesars and Cuba. So there's just a lot of stuff like you guys are talking about that's like dinging in my head. And so Vici, so like with the Roman Empire, Caesar said something about I came defeated and conquered or whatever it is. And Vici is the conquered. And as I see all of these things getting pushed into, say, Vici, because that's how they get their liquidation, because the laundering slowed down a lot is what I see. So as I said, keep an eye on it and these stocks and stuff like that. But Vici is we conquered. And I think that also has significance as we see all of this stuff tumble down. And again, as all you guys are talking about all this Operation Black stuff, and I had no freaking idea. So just, I don't know. I think there's something there. And I think that there's messaging with all of these different things, FYI.
So
I don't know.
Your assertion is that someone is basically buying up these assets to pull the rug out from them?
I think what it is since COVID, because Vici's a fairly new corporation. They haven't been around a super, super long time. So after COVID or right before COVID, they started, as liquidity, because people weren't coming here as much, and it's hard to launder money, especially after October 1st, 2017. So the people that have been coming in and stuff, but they still have to launder this money. And they have, so they're showing these numbers, but we know, and then especially after COVID, the numbers are really down and stuff. And the city's dead. And I know that they're doing upgrades and
but
stuff.
They obviously have other places. Yeah, they have other places to launder money. But to me, what they've
done is So what they've done is these corporations like Caesar's Palace, MGM, these are separate companies. They're rivals. And,
I know.
MGM Properties bought up. So when you say that, but Vici owns all the land and
that's
all the
what I'm
buildings,
saying.
Caesar's
So
Palace,
do you
MGM,
think there's
Netherlands.
do you think there's a white hat behind Vici that they're buying
Yes,
up the land?
Okay. I think that they launder, like the executive orders.
Yeah.
So they closed them down, and then Vici bought the land and the building. They're renting as if they're like a mall and like a triple net type of a thing. So that kind of stuff, because there's no liquidity, so they're still doing their stuff, and so the perception is you still have this rivalry, because like Fontainebleau, Resorts World, and things like that, they're all under Vici.
Yeah,
and it's just renting this space and stuff like that as they're still clearing it out. And I think that is, and like I said, Vici means conquered.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting, because obviously you could do what the business model to destroy most of the things that we frequented, like Toys R Us was, and Joann Fabrics and Red Lobster, was to buy up all of the property and then increase their rents until they went out of business. And so who knows, maybe the white hats are doing it to.
And it was yes, and what they're doing is they're conquering it. They're keeping the image alive as if it's still going. It's just a facade.
Yeah.
So you think that these are all separate corporations, but in actuality, I think they're captured and they're put into this other stuff. The illusion is everything's still going like normal, but
right?
In actuality, it's already captured and
potentially.
That's why I'm looking at a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, potentially.
There's still bad stuff in it. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
They're still finding bad stuff.
Yeah.
But I just see that this is very coincidental, and watching these things and knowing the history, like Dunes, we know who owned those.
Yeah.
And
that's very interesting.
Bellagio,
yeah.
Which was which was Steve Wynn.
Yeah.
Steve Wynn's ties, his wife being of that, and then he was the Irish person that had the Irish Italian in him. That was the marrying of the mob. The different mobs, all three mobs.
Yeah,
so
that's very interesting.
It's just very interesting how these different. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. If you kind of follow, it's kind of showing us the clean out of everything.
We can hope.
We
can hope.
Well, it really truly is, because if you think about who was under control of like the 9/11 or October 1st shooting and stuff, it was the ex-CEO of MGM Corporation and our lovely, Joe Lombardo, which is our governor now, which hid stuff, but he was appointed, he was also head of our police department here in Las Vegas before he became governor.
Yeah.
So there's a lot, and like these families are still here, but all that happened is that the mob ended up becoming the corporations.
Yep.
Became.
Yeah.
That's the laundering and control for the government.
Yeah. Illini, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel. Yeah, Stellar, just to kind of revive this conversation here. It is interesting how the narrative has changed. Back in the 1990s, the narrative always was that, yes, the Mafia built Las Vegas, in the 40s and the 50s and the early 60s with Bugsy Siegel, kicking off the Flamingo Hotel and basically getting offed. because they didn't think that the project was going to work. But then, you have the stories about Caesar's Palace comes in, and you've got Howard Hughes comes in, and he takes up residence at the top of, I think, the International or the Intercontinental or something like that. And then
we lost you.
Sorry. And then slowly starts buying up. So Howard Hughes comes in the 60s, and you got Caesar's Palace. And then, of course, you got the Sands and everything else. And now we're finding out that between Adnan Khashoggi and Howard Hughes and, I think Ron Perlman,
don't forget Adelson when you talk about the Sands. Excuse me, I don't want you to forget Adelson ended up buying the Sands. Don't forget Comdex. The Sands Corporation was Howard Hughes and that kind of stuff. But then Adelson took it. And that's, the Venetian and all that stuff. And don't forget the Sphere. Thank you.
It's just a shell game. The practices continued. It remained Mafia owned. But what happened was that now that the government was no longer investigating these people because the Mafia was serving as an arm of the federal government, everything just sort of got papered over, and in public we could all kind of say that no, these are well-run corporations and they're not being investigated by the federal government and we can trust them. It's more complicated than that now, we know.
Yeah, let's say that they were an arm of the CIA, because I argue that the CIA is not part of the federal government. But yeah, all right. SR, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel. I'm going to play a little bit devil's advocate here concerning what Stellar's pushing forward here. We do know for a fact, and you're right, we need to watch this close, because we do know for a fact that one of the major income sources for money laundering or criminal activity is real estate. And you're telling me they're taking this real estate and they're converting it into other things. So I'm with you. I hear what you're saying, but I've got my antenna up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Colonel.
Sure. It depends on who's behind. Hold on, Stellar. Hold on. It depends on who's behind the purchase of the real estate. And that's why I was asking her to clarify if she thought, given the name translation of the entity, whether it meant a white hat, because obviously it could still be a separation of the money laundering, to separate those two entities for nefarious reasons. But it could also be the white hat to do to them what they've been doing to all of us. So it could go either way. Go ahead, Stellar.
Okay, so if you understand, what is the most precious resource here in Nevada? Water. Who was the first controllers of the water? The railroad. What do they go after? Resources. Who has oil here underground? We do. When you start looking at the entities that came into Las Vegas, and you had the mob here, exactly Operation Gladio, putting their stuff in the skim and all that other stuff, but people started catching on to it. Maybe they got a little too greedy and decided that they were too powerful and they didn't want to do as much. So then, they started going after the mob, kind of like what they did with all these rulers like Saddam Hussein and anyone else, Libya's guy, if they decide their britches get too big. They have all these different plants already set up, whether it's, the head of your police department that is now in charge of a $33 million fund that nobody ever knows what really happened. It was supposed to go to the victims. And then knowing that a lot of these victims ended up, dying, that were witnesses too. They just seemed to die for whatever reason. Places that you guys talk about, music festivals and things like that. Absolutely. We know that there's a lot of trafficking here. We know that for a fact. The water here and the resources and what they're trying to do with all the other stuff. What happened in California with all of their water? Who ended up buying up all the water and turned it all off to the rest of it? The Resnick family, the pistachios. So when you start digging into these different areas and their resources, you start seeing this pattern, and you see that they're already, you know, like for Vegas, because of the gaming and it's the laundering. Now they've got the laundering all over the freaking country. They had an East Coast, which was Atlantic City, and who had licensing for gaming there, exposing, you know, the junk bonds and all that other stuff, penny stocks. But that was over there, and that whole system. Well, New Jersey followed their gaming and stuff like that out of Nevada. They followed our stuff. Now they have that all over the country. So, you know, it's all over rather than east and west. Then you have Macau, you know, they do the ties, you know, really locking down here in the United States their money, because they didn't want the money leaving the country, you know, so they couldn't get it out as easy to buy up real estate and stuff unless you were, you know, the deceitful side, like regular people that are trying to do it or whatever. They started.
We lost you, Stellar.
Wiring, you know, like when you're buying a house and stuff like that, they started changing the rules. They started sourcing the funds more. You had to, you know, there was no such cash at the end. You had to do wiring, otherwise you had to wait another 30 or 60 days for it to, you know, because of all the KYCs, the anti-laundering and stuff like that were starting to get put together and enforced through, you know, Dodd-Frank. So you start following all the stuff, you know.
Stellar, you're breaking up really bad. You're breaking up really bad, Stellar.
Yeah, I can't hear her either.
Okay. Zen, go ahead.
Do you have an episode where you cover Baines Johnson, that low-down, murdering, dirty
No.
SOB?
We've not done one dedicated just to him. I do have a book that I've read that talks about his whole assassin squad and stuff like that. We just haven't got to it yet.
Okay, cool.
Why are you so mad? Go ahead.
I think all I'm going to say is I think Stellar's got a, if that's not what's happening, that's a really great plan for that region.
Yeah.
Is to, I mean, that sounds absolutely perfect, to buy the land, squeeze them out.
Yeah.
This whole thing with COVID.
We can always hope.
And yeah, that sounds absolutely like a very, and I'm just going to, stellar idea.
Yeah.
You know, it seems fantastic. It seems legit. It's legal. Why not?
Yeah.
Right?
I agree. Alicia, go ahead.
Hey, and to build on that, you know, that really tracks with what several of us have been seeing here in Texas as well, in terms of, now I'd have to like go through the threads of companies and see where the connections could be, or if they are there. But just in terms of pattern recognition, I mean, water's been a big topic here for, years. And despite the pressure, despite us voting for people saying they're going to do something about water, they do very little to support it. And in the meantime, you know, there's been a lot of real estate development and not a lot of infrastructure added. That's just put a lot of pressure onto the water system and energy system. And not to also discount that there's a lot of like lithium and other minerals in our water in Texas in certain parts that are seeing some of these trends, if you will. And the housing market's been weird too. Like there's definitely a connection going on between the federal and state government in terms of, you know, kickbacks from the government from HUD to help, you know, build affordable housing in areas that, despite, you know, all of that was never actually affordable until now that the markets, because people are losing their jobs, and people are getting squeezed out of their houses because of high property taxes. They're just continuously getting larger despite promises of getting smaller. It's just interesting pattern recognition is all I'm going to get out.
Yeah.
You know? And another pattern recognition I found interesting is the gambling and the casino stuff that, I mean, they've been trying to do that in here in Texas since like the 30s. Another thing the Mafia here has been trying to do since like the 30s is getting weed to be legalized. That was part of the reason why the hemp ban in Texas didn't get into Texas until after Trump's first presidency, when they did the farmers thing, and it's been a completely free and open market owned by Texans for Texans, and it's been a flourishing industry. And isn't it interesting that we're seeing now some stuff happen at the federal level that will support both of those industries to finally make it here in Texas? I don't know. They're just interesting parallels and themes arising between what was happening in this book and things I'm seeing happen now.
Right. So. I agree. Stellar, go ahead.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't hear anything. I got kicked out. Holy crap, what did I do? So if you look at Davici's stuff, and like I said, when it came online and stuff like that, I think that it's very interesting timing. If you look at who their investors are, you guys know all the names, the Blackstones and stuff like Vanguards. It's all the same players. But I think that, again, because of the executive orders that Trump put in, I see like kind of like the separation of how they did AIG. But I don't think that it's the stuff that is under that control, if that makes any sense. So I do believe that it's more of a White Hat operation, especially when you see these things going on.
They really don't want you to talk, Stellar. Your voice is going out again.
Oh shit, it's happening again. Just trying to show those connections.
Yeah.
And so I really think that you guys should do this, because I really think that there's something to this. And so that I don't ruin your space, I'm going to shut up for now.
Oh my gosh, that's hysterical. Okay. All right. We're going to go ahead and call it a day. You guys just rock my world with this stuff. Okay. So we've already went over this schedule. You guys have a nice evening, and we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place.
The most important thing I forgot to say, the important thing that I was going to say was tying it back to the water. Bellagio, when Steve Wynn sold the Bellagio to MGM, he kept the water rights under there. Don't forget the aquifer, the hugest aquifer underneath Las Vegas Boulevard, and it goes under through this whole valley region area. And AI and most of our power and stuff like that goes to California. So just understand that it's the utilities, the water here in Nevada, Southern Nevada. You guys all know everything that's going on up north and down here, all the rare earth minerals in Nevada, BLM land. But if you guys look into it, you're going to see what I'm going to say, and you're going to see all the investors, and you're going to think the way that I do.
Okay.
The land and the water rights are the most important thing and the most valuable thing. Who cares about the gaming part? Does that make sense? Thank you.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. Renee, go ahead.
Yeah, just to tag on to that with pattern recognition in Vegas and this book. I mean, it's beyond coincidence that Trump went through the West Point Mafia, got involved with real estate, got involved with casinos. I mean, my gosh, this guy's timeline and what we've all learned is beyond coincidence to me.
It is. And you know what's funny about that is people can look at that one of two ways, that he's dirty. I mean, he showed up in all of these places. He was the one, you remember the Resorts International down in Bahamas that was formed under the front company, Mary Carter Paint, and then turned into a mafia CIA hangout in the Bahamas. He's the one that bought it. And so the black pill people will tell you that it's not a coincidence that he shows up in all of this stuff and that he's dirty. Well, at the same time, if you look at his actions, who else would you want around you than the people on the inside to build your case to destroy them. And Roy Cohn is one of, he shows up in so many stories. And, you know, obviously he was very close to Trump. You don't know the inside of this organization without being around the people in the organization. And his actions indicate that he is taking the old guard down. And that's the part that they always want to leave out. Yeah, okay, he spent his entire life around these people. But while he has been president, do they like him or do they not like them? They hate him. And the only reason that the vitriol is so strong is because they all recognize he knows everything about them. And that's paranoia because they know what's coming. There would be no other reason for them not to be all pro-Trump if they thought he was still on the reservation. And that's literally the piece that they miss. I just think it's hysterical that all of these people that are the anti-Trump people are the people that used to embrace him. There's a reason for that, because they're petrified of him. And if you can't do that, you have no business in this business. So that's a perfect way to end that. Thank you, Renee.
Pleasure.
And all of the rest of you. What a lively conversation. All right. So we'll be back tomorrow, 4 o'clock. See you then. Have a nice evening. See you guys later.